in terms of what we at ASDC are trying to do. We've already created standards in terms of job role standards. So we are, as a council, like the human resource counterpart of BIS, let's say. While BIS does the product specifications or the technical specifications for various products and services, we do specifications for human resources to be used in various job roles, and very specifically, we work on the automotive industry. So we've identified about 7 to 10 early job roles that we see coming into each area, and we'll have to probably develop more as we go along. But we've kind of got them standardized, developed. We are at a stage when we are actually investing our energy and focus in terms of doing a training of trainers, because you don't get ready-made trainers to conduct training for eventual beneficiaries or eventual candidates who would want to get trained in electric vehicle skills.
So I can see many of our leaders and members and guests joining in. So very happy to see the fraternity here, and I hope you're all doing well and in good health. Thank you very much for taking the time out and joining in today. And welcome to the Blue Circle. It's such a big privilege and a pleasure to reconnect with everyone, our distinguished panelists who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience that they bring in. And thank you to our distinguished audience for joining us. We've received 200 plus registrations, most of whom are senior leaders. Many of our members are also have joined and are repeat visitors to our webinars, which is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online modes as well. And for those of you who are new with us today, the Blue Circle is an exclusive community and ecosystem which is curated for business leaders currently across 6 sectors, which are e-mobility, energy, real estate, healthcare, aerospace and defense and logistics. And very soon we're adding 14 new sector communities to our platform to form the Blue Circle 20. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. In response to the COVID challenge, the Blue Circle has also accentuated its digital presence. One of the many modes we employ is our weekly webinar series in our digital publication. And in addition to this, and you'll be happy to know that we very recently launched the first version of the Blue Circle app, which is curated for senior leaders, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with like-minded people, house high-quality curated content, and also provide access to business opportunities across our core sectors. So those leaders who are interested, please do join us. I will also share the link to the app in the chat section, and we'll be soon sending out invitations to our new guests post the webinars. And today, as part of our Skilling India series, we're privileged to have big minds and leading thinkers of the industry to join in for our e-mobility community's discussion. The topic is Roadmap to Cope with the Emerging EV Skill Demand. And now, in the best interest of time, I will just briefly mention the names and designations of the leaders who've joined us. We have with us Mr. Arun Malhotra, former MD, Nissan India, Mr. Arindam Lahiri, CEO, Automotive Skills Development Council India, Dr. Praveen Kumar, Professor, Department of EEE, Indian Institute of Technology, Ms. Rashmi Urdhwareshe, President, SAE India, and our chair and moderator for the session is Mr. Amit Bhatt, Executive Director, Urban Transport, WRI. Thank you very much, sirs and ma'am. It's an absolute privilege, and I now request Mr. Bhatt to please chair and moderate the session.
Thanks a lot, Siddharth. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning to wherever people are joining this interesting webinar. And before we start, I think the reason why we are doing this webinar is that many of us probably read and heard about a few weeks back about an IPCC report which came in. And the report was actually kind of framed as the code red for humanity. And the reason why it was framed in that manner is that the report actually mentioned that human activities is changing the climate in an unprecedented and sometimes irreversible ways. And therefore, I think what we do and what we don't do is not only important from sustainability point of view or livelihood point of view or quality of life point of view, but I think a lot of it is actually about the survival of human species on this earth. And the reason why it is very important for us is that, especially in India, is that if you look at the emissions which are coming out from India, almost a third of CO2 emission comes out from India. And we have seen globally that cities on one side contribute 70% of global economic growth, the gross domestic product as we speak, but the urban economies also contribute around 70% of emission. And so on one side, if the urban economy is the wheel of growth, development, and prosperity, then transport is that wheel of that engine. And so we cannot address the issue of climate change by not addressing the transport and the city's conversation as we speak. And therefore, I think it is really, really interesting is the fact that as the country moves towards more fuel efficient vehicles, moves towards the ambitious target of having a huge amount of electric vehicle fleets as part of the overall transport fleet, I think we have to overcome certain challenges. And when we talk about electric mobility, we often talk about charging infrastructure. We talk about availability of requisite models as we speak. We also talk about a lot, in fact, about the high upfront cost, the finances, and so on and so forth. But I think one of the big missing pieces in this whole journey towards EV adoption is the huge requirement of skilling. And I think that is something which we have to actively work, because EV skills are also required to also mitigate some of the high employment rates that's incoming. And so shortage of skill is one factor which is driving higher unemployment, but also not having adequate skills professional is also the reason why some of this development as we expect in the EV is not happening. And I think as the country and as the world, as we are moving from from the lockdown phase of the COVID to the unlock and subsequently to life beyond COVID, I think we have to make choices in terms of the cities we want, the habitation we want, and therefore moving towards cleaner technologies is actually a no-brainer. And so how do we get our skills right? How do we get the workforce that we need to have the right skill set, to have the right adoption? I think that will be critical for this transition. So with this background, we have 4 eminent speakers who have joined us today and who would be giving their perspective in terms of how they see the roadmap to cope with the emerging EV skill demands. And so initially they will give an opening remark, and then we will take this conversation forward. So we have with us Mr. Arindam Lahiri, CEO of Automotive Skill Development Council, Ms. Rashmi, as the moderator introduced, Mr. Praveen, Kumar, and Mr. Arun Malhotra. So let me start with Mr. Arindam first to give his opening remark, and I would request Mr. Arindam to keep the remark to 5-6 minutes, and this request will be for all the speakers. So over to you, Mr. Arindam.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatt, and a very good afternoon to all of you. And also, if other people have joined from other time zones, again, good evening and good morning. I'm very happy to see that, the Blue Circle fraternity has decided to discuss about this very important issue, uh, which is facing not only the automotive industry, but in general within the country, because uh, getting parts, getting technologies is one side of the challenge. The other side of the challenge, is the human resources. So which you always say that there are two aspects or two sides to a solution. There is a hardware solution and there is a software solution. The hardware solution has its own merits and demerits, but today we are going to talk about the human resources problem, which is more like the software that would enable the organizations to carry out the implementation of the technology, the implementation of manufacturing, design, manufacturing, and servicing of vehicles that they would want to produce and offer to the market. Uh, Given all the context that Mr. Bhatt has already outlined in terms of climate change requirements and for a vast country like India, obviously electrification of vehicles is happening and probably happening at a faster pace than what we had anticipated initially, especially in the areas of two-wheelers and three-wheelers. I think we see a very, very rapid adoption of vehicles. Now, with this, the challenge is that we are talking about an industry which has largely grown through mechanical engineers over the last decade or so, because of an introduction of a lot more technologies which has got to do with electric connections within the vehicle or electronics within the vehicle. We've seen some integration with other areas of engineering. However, overall, if you look at this industry, it is predominantly still driven by mechanical engineer, which is exactly what I am also as a background in terms of people coming from that kind of a background. So it does take not only skilling requirements for fresh manpower, youngsters coming into this industry, it also involves a fair amount of reskilling and upskilling of existing manpower in the industry. And it stretches right from R&D to manufacturing, to sales, to service, and even in driving. In fact, let me tell you that we've just started piloting a program with one of the OEMs where we are upskilling the current drivers to learn how to use the electric vehicle, understand the diagnostics, charging requirements. They've all been used to reading the fuel meter, and they know exactly that when it is showing, the needle is showing 0, they can still drive another 50 kilometers or whatever it is. But with battery charge, they're not very sure. And also there are other complexities around availability of a charging station, whether fast charging or slow charging, and all the added complexities around it. So there is a lot of unknown parameters in the whole space, and therefore every person involved in making and using this vehicle need to be made aware of this technology, and that technology is also not constant; it's constantly changing. So it's a complex problem that we are trying to solve here. Just to give you a very quick brief in terms of what we at ASDC are trying to do, we've already created standards in terms of job role standards. So we are, as a council, like the human resource counterpart of BIS, let's say. While BIS does the product specifications or the technical specifications for various products and services, we do specifications for human resources to be used in various job roles, and very specifically, we work on the automotive industry. So we've identified about 7 to 10 early job roles that we see coming into each area, and we'll have to probably develop more as we go along. But we've kind of got them standardized, developed, We are at a stage when we are actually investing our energy and focus in terms of doing a training of trainers, because you don't get ready-made trainers to conduct training for eventual beneficiaries or eventual candidates who would want to get trained in electric vehicle skills. And therefore, training of trainers is very important. We've also collaborated with a couple of our international partners from UK and Germany to transfer some of their learnings from their countries. And we are also, trying to have a greater awareness around electric vehicles through various partnerships. We've recently also launched a learning management program, e-learning management module on xEVs in partnership with Automotive Corporation, the Indian arm of the Automotive Corporation, and various other programs with OEMs like MG Motors. We run a program called Project Dakshta, which is aimed at collaborating with college students in terms of picking up skills on manufacturing and service requirements as far as EV is concerned. Just to give you, I want to end this round with just a quick example on one of the, experiments you might want to call it, which we did last year, or basically at the start of this this calendar year, 2021, where with support from World Bank, we did an experimental batch of about 30 young girls being trained for EV two-wheeler servicing. And they completed their training program end of March as we were entering the second wave in this country. And even with that second wave coming in, these 30 candidates were picked up by various dealerships readily, because they were wanting to take a look at trained manpower available to do electric vehicle servicing. And the bigger point that I want to highlight with this experiment is also that it opens up a lot more gender inclusion, gender diversity in the workforce in automotive, which we've been struggling with, which also is going to be made possible with the electric vehicles coming in. And everyone that we talk to in the industry, we do emphasize on the fact that please don't think conventionally. We need to get all hands rolling in terms of getting people trained on electric vehicles. Even in your sales team, they would need to get trained on electric vehicles. And that is where we are as a council. I will end it here, and I'll be happy to take further questions as we go along.
Thanks a lot, Arindam, for wonderful kind of opening remark, and also for sticking to the allocated 5 to 6 minute time periods. Thanks again. So, okay, so let's move forward. And I will now request Rashmi, the president of SAE India, to deliver her opening remark. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Amit, and good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Mr. Lahiri mentioned that he's a mechanical engineer, and I'm on the fortunate side that I'm an electronics engineer, and I'm very happy to see and very excited to see how the changing technologies have brought into forefront something which was earlier a supportive role. Say, for example, power electronics, digital electronics, etc., into the forefront. Any major change that is so disruptive obviously comes with a skilling challenge, as was mentioned earlier. And then, of course, 3 levels, that is new acquisition, reskilling, and upskilling. We have seen it in previous disruptions, say, for example, BS6 migration. We also saw it in safety-related regulations as fundamental as crash testing. And now with electrification, obviously, the challenges are going to be there. It's not that industry couldn't, cope up with those challenges, But I think we should stop working in a way we start digging the well when we become thirsty. I think a systematic approach and a planned approach is what helps. We all are poised, not just electrification, but towards the sustainable mobility migration. I think we should work more open-minded than just looking at electrification programs. We should also look at how the integration will bring in better sustainability to the transportation sector, rather than focused electrification also. In my view and my experience in handling the industry earlier through ARA and then now through SAE is, while of course OEMs do have a larger bandwidth to kind of handle this challenge, but tier 1, tier 2, and then subsequently tier 3 suppliers and manufacturers will have much more challenging task to handle the disruption. Especially those who are into IC business, they will find it extremely challenging. Whereas on OEM side, we see that there is a complete pivoting which is happening from R&D all the way up to maintenance. And, Mr. Lahiri also mentioned it in his opening remarks. We at SA India have undertaken very, very aggressively proficiency improvement programs, PIP, for the professionals who are into the automotive domain. We run these programs all across, and my experience in last 1 year has been there were several, thousands of people who came forward to undergo upskilling. So that's the need which is emerging. We also saw kind of the breadth and the depth with which the skill sets need to be enhanced when it comes to power electronics or when it comes to digital data management. In fact, the new sustainability model, we should also look at circularity of the economy. That's one concept I think we all as practicing engineers need to be mindful of. It's not just the powertrain, but it's overall circularity of what all goes into the vehicles. Along with it, I think more important than the powertrain electronics is the capability of digital world now. We have a lot of opportunity to utilize data. So we are going to need data analytics capabilities, knowledge management capabilities, as well as AI and machine learning. So these will be the future trends that are required to be created. The question remains whether we are going to have the captive manpower. Can we afford to have very, very specific in-depth experts, or can we leverage from other sectors? So for example, power electronics already India had a strength in other sectors. So can we not leverage it? So these are some of the possible opportunities to work closely than just depend on captive, manpower engagement, or so to say. Because along with it, obviously, is linked the employability. We start up new courses in colleges, engineering colleges, but then we end up finding that, the offtake has all of a sudden diminishes. The needs are completely changing. So that's another dilemma that we should resolve. I'm hopeful that we will be able to handle this with the kind of experts that we have in research labs, the engineering colleges, and all across the country, several skilling initiatives which are supported through grassroots as well as from the top. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thanks a lot, Rashmi, ma'am, for this wonderful insight. So I see a lot of people who have joined. And before I move to Dr. Praveen, I would request people who are part of this webinar, if you have any questions, then you can use the Q&A link below and you can type in your questions. And we'll make sure that we will take these questions with the respective panelists. So go to the Q&A box and type your questions, and then we will take it from there on. Okay, now let's move forward, and I would invite Mr. Praveen Kumar from IIT Guwahati to give his opening remark. Over to you, Mr. Kumar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bhatt, and good afternoon to all the audience and all the participants. Well, from where I sit and how I see the things, to my mind, there are 10 areas which need a lot of skilling to be done when we talk vis-a-vis the e-mobility. So the first one is the battery technology. We desperately need to work on battery technology, right from the cell chemistry to the battery pack. That comes first to my mind. Then we have the drivetrains. So when we talk of drivetrains, it's the power electronics, the motors, and the controllers, where we definitely have a serious shortage, especially in control systems. And then we come to the vehicle concepts, because gradually we are moving towards more modular designs like e-axles or skateboard platforms, to give some examples. So we need a lot of skill to be developed in such kind of new concepts for vehicle design. And then not to forget the charging, so which includes again power electronics, but also a good understanding of power systems, because it's a combination of both. So that's an area which needs a lot of skilling to be done. And there's a critical aspect which I always see we need a lot of skilling is in first responders. For example, if an EV meets with an accident, then how should the first responders react to it? They shouldn't just start spraying water over the vehicle. They should know which are the high tension cables and how should it be handled. So a lot of skilling, a lot of attention has to be done in that area as well. We would need service technicians, because unlike the conventional internal combustion engine vehicles, we don't have history of failures. We just can't go with our EV to the technician and say, I hear a strange noise on the left rear end. And then the technician would know, okay, it's that problem. We don't have that kind of a know-how yet. So we would need a serious skilling in that direction as well. And we need a lot of people for vehicle certification and testing. We need precision engineering, especially when it comes to motors, their manufacturing. So they're not the conventional industrial motors or pump motors, which, it just works. So they're really a precise piece of engineering where we would need to have people. And as we go more towards the connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, we of course need people with skills in AI, machine learning, IoT, and cloud platform, which is essential to make these technologies become a success. And apart from that, I think we need people with good skills to develop new standards, new laws and legislations, because laws, especially with autonomous vehicles, are a big challenge. So if the vehicle meets with an accident, then who exactly is the culprit there? So we need people who can understand the nuances of the technology and come with proper legislations. And also we need people who can draft proper policies for the country. So these are the areas of skills that we need. And then there are 4 levels of skills that our country desperately needs. And that is from the technician and workshop floor to factory floor operators, which would be mostly ITI level trained people, to service and production engineers, which might be from polytechnics predominantly, to people who can design and do R&D, which would mostly be the university graduates. And apart from that, we need higher order skills, which I like to call. So that includes leadership. We need people who can look into the future, plan what the company or the country at large needs, and also who have a large appetite for risk, because here we are talking about a new technology which involves innovation, and innovation always involves risk. And also we need people who can bring in the discipline of innovation. Today as a nation, somehow we overvalue jugaad, which I think is something to be shunned. It should not be spoken of. It should be replaced by a serious discipline of innovation. And with that only we can create the know why. We pay a lot of attention to know how, but know how is just that. You know how to fix something, but know why would tell us why certain things has certain dimensions and why do these two parts come together. So know why creation is again a high order skill that we would be needing in our country to make e-mobility mission a success. And to do that, I would say we would need to overhaul the curriculum at all levels, starting from ITI right up to the universities and IITs. And the curriculum development has to be done together with all these stakeholders. So that includes the industry, that includes the governmental bodies, the students, current students, even the passed out students who are already in the jobs. And we would also need to create what I call technology centers in association again with the industry, which can do a translation from TRL, Technology Readiness Level 4, to right up to TRL 8, so that we get a mature technology from the lab scale prototypes. So we need multiple of such centers, and that will enable us to become kind of reliant and independent in developing new technologies. So yeah, these are my few takes on the skilling issues.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Praveen. And I really like this framing of moving from know how to know why. That's an interesting perspective that you shared. Thanks a lot.
Thank
you. Again, folks who are participating, if you have any questions, you can type it into the Q&A chat box. There are questions coming, but do keep them flowing so that we can take it with the respective panelists. Okay, so let's move forward. We will now ask Mr. Arun Malhotra, who is the former Managing Director of Nissan Motor Corporation India, to give his opening remarks. Over to you, Mr. Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatt. I think one of the biggest things which happened in the last 100 years, we had a commonality. That is, we had IC engines, which started in the late 19th century, which was there about 1890 and continued till today. And in the last few years, there's been a major transformation. And this transformation is not only in the EV industry. A lot of conventional vehicles, which are the IC engines also, are seeing the transformation, whether you see in terms of sensors, whether you see in terms of analytics, whether in terms of electronics. So there is a transformation. So the change which is happening, which we are looking for skilling for EV, is not only linked to EV, it's even linked to the conventional vehicles, which are part of the old IC engine technology. Now looking at, the need or the type of, we used to have a mechanical engineering, which Arindam touched on, and Rashmi is electronics engineer. So we had a branch which got created called mechatronics, which meant that you need to know mechanical engineering, but some electronics also. But the transformation which happened is unbelievable. And now probably if you have to put a branch, I don't know what name would you give to that branch. I think the challenges, and let's look at the challenges and the approach forward. Skill sets which are there for the conventional IC engines, right from the design, development, production, supply chain, manufacturing, selling, everything has been linked to IC engines. So you need a complete reincarnation, or I would call it a reinvention or rebirth. And how can this rebirth happen? Now, one, you can say, no, it's a very big, long process, but there are 3-4 areas which can happen. One is the way our education system, up till now we have worked, and this is a major change happening now. This academia industry interface or the centers of excellence interface has to be much, much sharper and clearer. So one peg, you have the IITs, and then you have the second-rank engineering colleges, the diploma, the ITI. They represent the value chain. Other side, you have centers of excellence in government, whether it's SCI, whether ICAT, whether ARI, or whether it's ASDC, that's the second part of it. And then you have clearly companies which also do a major job in terms of training. And fourth, how can we learn from other industries? Because as Rashmi mentioned, a lot of things which you're going to do in this part of industry have already been covered in some manner with the phenomenal growth in the telecom industry or the electronic industry or the computer industry. So I think we have to take an amalgamation of these parts. One of the learnings which when you talk to foreign collaborators or when you talk to foreign countries, they say one of the challenges in our system has been, which limits the growth of education, has been the focus on concepts rather than an application, and then focus on specialist versus generalist. Generalist instead of being a specialist. So what I think is need is designing specific programs, especially focused on the industry. And some programs can be a relearning process. Some could be a short process. Why do we need 4 years engineering courses? We produce the largest number of engineers, but 80% engineers, as somebody mentioned, who are unemployable or unengineerable. Can't we have specialized 1-year courses, which can be any fields? And like EVs is definitely one field. EV electronics can be part of it. There's a real demand for it. And where ICAT is doing work and ASDC is also doing work. So the challenge today is learn from other industries also. So one, we have to make a change in our industry. Other is learn from other industries. And third, this industry academia interface, which I call the industry academia interface, has to become more stronger. Every pillar has to take up a certain specific responsibility. And if we do this, we move forward. I think since we are talking of the entire value chain, we always forget the dealer end. 40,000 dealers in the country and a lot of authorized garages even. So how do you make this transformation? And I think what EdTech has shown in the last 2-3 years, I'm not trying to hold a candle for Byju's or an academy, but a lot of digital learning can be a very good way to leapfrog rather than waiting for a long time. So that's something which has to be emerged. So it would be a good idea to even take, you can say, the help or the support or the alliance or collaboration with companies which are in the tech sector. So I think this sort of thing we do, and we take it on our footing, but with clear stakeholders, every stakeholder focusing on a certain area, we can meet this challenge. But I think there has to be a cohesion, a collaboration, and more of a symphony rather than a cacophony. So all these key stakeholders need to put their heads down and say, what areas are we going to address? How are we going to do it? How are we going to collaborate? And how are we going to merge? If we do this, we will emerge much stronger. It's not that Herculean task. I think it's more focused approach. That's the way I look at it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Malhotra, for the wonderful remark. So let's move forward, and I will ask. Let me ask Mr. Lahiri first. Mr. Lahiri, you mentioned a very interesting point of how can gender inclusion be brought into the EV adoption. I think this is very interesting because one, I think someone who's working in this space, we see transport in general is very men dominated, right? The sector itself. And if you come into the operations, and that is even more male dominated sector. So can you elaborate more on how do you think EV can change the dynamics and bring in much greater gender inclusion in the electric mobility?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, see, gender inclusion overall in the industry, as you highlighted, is a very important issue that the industry would need to constantly address. And I do see a lot of OEMs making a lot of initiatives, efforts at their level, at a large corporate level. People like Rashmi ma'am being in the industry also should be able to also inspire a lot of young women wanting to build a career in engineering, R&D. So yes, there have been areas like typically in engineering, R&D, sales, which have within the industry also, which have been kind of earmarked, that these are the kind of functions that one would want to do it. I mean, of late, there have been a lot of initiatives in the areas of assembly, areas of paint shops, welding shops even, where, inclusion of women has been a very focused approach of the industry. But again, a lot more needs to be done. What I mentioned in the context of EV was the fact that, with the IC engine, the focus on, let's say, an area like a service technician, it was considered to be a mechanic, which is like a dirty job because you get under the car and then you kind of fix something. That's the impression that generally, parents at large would have, and therefore they would not want their girls to be doing something like this. Today, of course, even in IC engine, the whole servicing itself has moved to a very different plane, as Arunji was talking about, that it's not only about EV, but it's about the entire generation and the transformation that the automotive industry has undergone. where today you need diagnostic tools, softwares, connecting your laptops to the ECUs and trying to figure out what's gone wrong with the vehicle. EVs are having a much cleaner image. You know, that dirtiness around the auto servicing, I think, is going away. So it might be a little more useful for us, or a little more easier for us to kind of attract young women coming into this domain and this field. Because the biggest challenge or the hurdle that we face today in attracting young women coming into an area in automotive, in manufacturing, in service, is the fact that most of the times, even if we are able to convince the young mind, it's their parents who kind of put a stop. No, our girl child is not going to be working in this kind of an environment. So it's the perception of the image that I think is possible to change in the context of EV. And that's what my interest was.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lahiri. Definitely a very interesting insight into the EV industry, more from the gender inclusion perspective. So I will now request Rashmi ma'am to elaborate more. Ma'am, you mentioned about circular economy in your opening remark. Can you elaborate a little more with what do you mean, especially with the EV context?
Yeah, sure. Not just EV context, but I can elaborate in the context of EV. Circularity is to be seen from the long-term perspective and a complete life cycle analysis of the vehicle technology that goes there. We are talking about large penetration of EVs into the market. Today, what is good for the society may turn out to be challenging in future. For example, what will happen to those thousands and lakhs of batteries when they come to the end of their life? Are we geared up for recovery? Are we geared up? Are we energy efficient? Are we doing the job correctly? While penetration of EVs is on the basis of electricity being coming in from the green electricity. So I think these are the aspects to be borne in mind while planning our overall perspective towards transportation. Circularity is also in terms of value for the society and what we pay finally as a carbon footprint. There's a lot of debate still happening on manufacturing of batteries being also polluting the air. So we have to take that in view before we actually plan our future.
Thanks a lot, ma'am, for clarifying this question.
I just also want to add here to what Mr. Lahiri mentioned about the inclusion, if I may.
Yes, ma'am, please go ahead.
Yeah. While of course EVs do have an opportunity for diversity and inclusion, mobility as a service also is now opening up very large, opportunities for better development of simulation, better software, better applications and such, which are much more suitable for women to make their own impact. And these are the new trends that I think will change the diversity scenario in automotive.
Thanks a lot, Rashmi ma'am. Dr. Praveen, you mentioned about overhauling of the curriculum. So I just wanted to understand, is that conversation also happening at IIT Guwahati or IIT in general, of creating something focused on EV as either at the graduate or the postgraduate level?
Yeah, it is happening. And IIT Guwahati was the first one to introduce a master's program in e-mobility. And for that, we actually did a 6 months of exercise. So I was spearheading that and contacted a lot of industry experts from India and from abroad to frame a curriculum which will meet the requirements of today as well as for a decade down the line. And we continuously have industry talks almost 4 times a week, where there are experts from around the world who come and interact with our students for around 90 minutes and give them a different perspective, things which are not taught in the class, but they actually share their experiences. So we are doing that actually. But the thing is that, being a brick and mortar university, conventional university, scaling up is a problem. We can't cater to more than a certain number of students. There is a physical limitation to that. And that needs more money to build up the infrastructure. Then we can even bring in more students. So the question always, the bottleneck always is the resources that are at our disposal. But it is doable. It has been done. We have demonstrated that with this unique program that we created. So it's very much feasible.
Great. And so nice to hear IIT Guwahati kind of taking lead in developing a course on e-mobility. So congratulations on that. Thanks a lot for sharing this, Dr. Praveen. Mr. Malhotra, one question to you. And you mentioned about creating that symphony, because skill development has to happen at multiple fronts. So I wanted to understand, in your thought process, in terms of who should drive this integration. I mean, if we have to look at it at a national level, who should drive it at national level, at state level, and maybe at city level? Is there any indication from your side on how to move forward?
So, very interesting and very intriguing question. Who will drive it at the national level? But I think the one here, I'm not looking at somebody driving it, one being the master and other being the, you can say, the planets around that. I'm looking of more interaction. Like Dr. Praveen mentioned, the IITs which are doing it. Now, one of the challenges is that a lot of electric vehicle design, development, and software is totally a different subject which people in the auto industry don't know about. So they will drive that part of the effort because their value addition is there. Automotive Skill Development Council will drive more focus on, you can say, the tier 2 suppliers or maybe the dealership staff. Centers of excellence, like whether it's ICAT or maybe also derive a setup for startups so that they can also gear up accordingly. So I think what is more required is more talking to each other. Generally, what's been happened in the past is that industry academia interface or interface between government has been slow. So how can we collaborate? See, heads from 3-4 typical organizations get together. One is representing the educational institutions, and even I was talking of the tech companies even, because they can really leapfrog the learning process. So it's getting together on a monthly basis, just work it, this is our process, this is our approach, move on. But I don't want one particular leader and more of listening approach. And the other thing which is important is learning from other industries. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's so much learning from electronic industry, there's so much learning from telecom industry. So that's the way approach I see to make it move forward.
Thanks a lot for clarifying this. I think interaction, I think that's a great starting point. And I think what we have seen in the past is that interaction is not happening to the desired level. And even if when it is happening, it is not involving all the stakeholders. So how do you get this multiple stakeholder together on a common platform to drive this conversation forward? I think that's a fantastic suggestion to look at. Okay, so let's move forward and let me take some questions which have come from the audience. So maybe the first question I would probably ask Mr. Lahiri to answer. And this is from Mr. Ashok Vyamala, who's the director, RV Skills, Automotive Electronics Design. I think this question is, if I can frame it slightly differently, is that if we have to kind of accelerate EV, then we need to establish EV clusters of different, so comprising of tools, infrastructure, testing, and so on and so forth. Is that something that is a possibility to go forward? Mr. Lahiri, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, I think cluster is an approach that automotive industry has generally focused on. In the IC engine era, if you look at India, typically has about 10 to 12 prominent clusters, auto clusters that we talk about. And so we have a couple of OEMs who have their manufacturing plants or maybe more. And then you have suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 kind of opportunities. Now, while to my mind, IC engine was largely about focus, very heavy focus on manufacturing. In terms of electric vehicles, the focus is going to be equally important in terms of research and development, R&D, design, testing, that kind of a facility. And there would be, and a lot of work which is getting done is on software simulation, etc. So with those kind of facilities, I think it can be done anywhere and everywhere. But yes, those which need physical interventions like fabrication of body, other mechanical aggregates, etc., those surely will need to focus on a cluster-based approach, and they will continue probably on a cluster-based approach as we already have. It's just that those clusters will have to be aligned and enabled with the EV growth that would be happening across the country.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lahiri. The next question is from Mr. Amit Kaul, who is the CBO at Farmers Co-op Organics. And his question is, and maybe Dr. Praveen, you would like to take this. And he asked that for scaling, is there any software training required? If yes, then how can they tie up with such startup for it?
Well, if I understand it correctly, then for EV per se, we don't need any software training. We of course need training on simulation tools. So we can't call them as software training. But yeah, if we go more towards connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, then we would need training in big data analysis or machine learning and so on. So these are the typical skill sets that a person would need to have to succeed in this new automobile industry. So as no such programming skills as such, but yes, skills in model-based development, skills in using various high-end simulation tools is what we would need, definitely.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Praveen. Okay, let's move to the next question. And this question is from Mr. Arun Laikar, who is the promoter at Arun Auto. And maybe Rashmi ma'am, if you could take this question. The question he's asking is that, how can one calculate resale of batteries? And he's mostly looking at batteries for bikes and scooter, but that could be in general. How do you calculate resale value of battery? If that is this, how does one go about doing it?
Yeah, I think I'll, rather than how to calculate the cost part of it, I'll explain the principle with which this can be calculated. When it comes to batteries, they have typical charging and discharge cycles that decides the life. It also depends on how actually the temperatures are maintained and complete kind of environment in which such charging, etc., and the duty cycle which it undergoes. Usually for a traction battery or a vehicular battery, the life goes from about 4 years to 5 to 7 years, depending on several these aspects. After it has lived its useful life, usually such batteries can also be diverted for the second use. And that's what typically is done for the circular economy I mentioned earlier in a different context. Our resources remain resources, whether they are utilized in vehicles or they are utilized somewhere else. So second use is something the batteries, there is a very clear channel which is operational. When it comes to how do we calculate the overall cost of used vehicle, I think there are some ground rules to find out how much is the useful life remaining, how much is the safety consideration, etc. Based on this, I think it can be worked out. So that's my response.
Thanks a lot, Rashmi.
But I can take it offline.
Sure, sure. The other interesting question, and this is Mr. Malhotra, if you could answer. In your remark, you mentioned about learning from other sectors. And so this question is again from Mr. Ashok Vemula, and he asking, what can we learn from other countries regarding skilling? Is there something to learn about?
So two things which you can learn, I don't know, the countries you can learn is China, Japan, or you take the Scandinavian country or US or Scandinavian countries. One of the things is focus short, specialized, super specialized courses. We have this concept in our engineering, 5-year course, 4-year course, 3 years we do, 6 months we do a special sponsorship. So can we have, say, just after graduation, even after schooling, 1 year full integrated course? So how to make it super specialized? Second thing in the curriculum, the way the approach and that is changing is how to focus more than the concept is to the application. This is something which is relied because this line is learned through application. And third is that openness of mind across industries. Because if you look at it, I was talking to some people in the industry, and they were saying that there's a lot to learn from the design. We are still not at the end of designing, because if India has become to the world center for EV, we can't be just focused on manufacturing or selling. It has to be in design and development. So in design and development, that architecture, that software, that R&D, those skills need to be specialized. So as Dr. Kumar mentioned, was that the specialized courses. So focus specialized courses and offer specialized courses in the market. They can be offered through the top institutions, the IITs, or even from the centers of excellence. And these are the specific. If you're on battery charging, let it of course be on battery charging. If you are on something on terms of the entire thing, in terms of the operations of the electric vehicle, let it be a course on that. So specific courses, more focus on application and more lateral thinking and more openness to get it. But I think one of the biggest challenges in the industry today is unlearning. Because people who've been part of the industry, auto industry, they have to unlearn a lot of things. Because you've just done the piston, connecting rod, crankshaft, camshaft, transmission. That's you've grown with the vocabulary. So it's also time to unlearn. You know, you can only learn. So new people, you'll get them to learn afresh. But it's always more difficult to teach people to unlearn. So this unlearning process has to start. And why I think it's bigger, even the EV market may be smaller, but the way electronics, software, semiconductors have entered vehicles, this is still part of the EV industry in some way or the other. Because today the biggest problem with auto, everybody is talking semiconductors. This back, nobody knew it. So that's the sort of 360-degree process we require.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Malhotra, for specifically highlighting the need for learning and relearning. I think that's a very interesting part of the EV transition. Okay, so one interesting question, which is from Mr. Abhinav Sharma from PwC, and I will leave it to all the panelists, anyone who would like to take this question. So he's saying that one of the challenges of planning and scaling intervention is that in this domain is present demand, which is, I mean, still EV is rising, but again, the numbers are much, much low compared to conventional. So is there any outlook on, let's say, EV penetration in the next 3 years, or let's say, what kind of EV jobs or what number of EV jobs are we expecting in, let's say, 2025? Any outlook on that?
So you know, if you look at the EV penetration, you can't talk about EV together in one. EVs are in different segments. The two-wheeler penetration definitely going to take at a faster pace. By 3 to 4 years down the line, even with 25%, which is a conservative figure, about 4 years down the line, we are talking of a 5 million industry today. Then we'll follow the small commercial vehicles, the three-wheelers, which are unique, and also buses and trucks, which is the commercial run. And then would follow the cars, where probably the transition would be slightly slower because the government benefits are flowing in that area. But as I want to have added before, it is not only focused on the entire learning of what the market will be, because you have to prepare for the market before. It's also focused on what already the electronics has gone in. And a lot of electronics principles are still very common, the way the batteries are used. Even the conventional gear engine parts which are there have got a lot of embedded of electronics and EVs fitted into it, infotainment, other things. So I would say one is the EV industry, but even before the EV industry, the way the auto industry, the conventionalized engines exist, there also the momentum has started changing. The shift is happening. So it's a process. The pie of the cake pie is much bigger than what we see today.
I have something to add here. The mobility requirements are changing. The powertrain is undergoing changes, but also we are forgetting that complete vehicle as an integrated unit is required to be safe. So safety requirements are going to continue to exist. In fact, they are going to be enhanced. What goes into design of EVs, whether it's just a small number or otherwise, is going to be, universally made applicable if we are today looking a horizon of next decade or so. So these skills are definitely going to be needed at the design stage, then of course manufacturing and then servicing and so on and so forth. I think more than electrification, I mentioned about earlier also, I think we have to look at a green scenario altogether. So today it's battery powered vehicles, then will be fuel cell and then hydrogen and so on and so forth. That's going to be overall changing technology roadmap. We all have been discussing it at multiple levels. At SA, we discuss at SIN levels. There are discussions at government level also. There are discussions. Whether it happens in 2025 or 2030, that's debatable. But the skills are identified and that needs to be planned for sure.
Yeah, I would like to add just something based on our experience while developing this entire master's program. We figured out that by 2025, the biggest skills shortage or the demand would be in power electronics and control systems. That's where it's a major pain point for most of the automobile industry, as well as specialists in battery pack design. And beyond 2025, what we forecast is a lot of demand for AI and ML, especially when connected and autonomous vehicles are going into, would start to become a reality. So that's the forecast that we have from our end.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Praveen. There is this question, maybe Mr. Lahiri can take it. I think this question is from Mr. Prem Bajaj from Green Ship Initiatives. And he's asking, is there any program on upskilling of existing mechanic shops to the EV category? And if so, what, can you share some details?
Sure. So upskilling of existing mechanics can be done under a program that we talk about in terms of recognition of prior learning, which is like a bridge program. So you just train them on short-term differential content, which is required, assuming that they already have this, basic knowledge about the overall vehicle, all the mechanical parts, etc. So not only the mechanics, I would like to highlight here that there is a complete range of upskilling programs that we offer at ASDC through our various training partners. Areas of manufacturing, areas of research and design, we do very interesting programs around system engineering, which is based on simulation and modeling, which I think on the question of whether we have a job requirement, there might be very limited job requirements as it stands today. But as Mr. Malhotra has talked about, that we need to have designed in India kind of a product. There is going to be a lot more focus on core engineering, system engineering, not only in the vehicle level, but also at a sub-assembly level, at a battery pack level, as Dr. Kumar has already emphasized. So all of these upskilling programs are available. And if there are, organizations who are wanting to do these programs, they could visit our website as well as write to us or reach us, and we could take it offline.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lahiri. I think there is one question, I'm not sure, maybe Mr. Malhotra, if you'd like to take this. This is from Dr. Nanjam Sugumaran. And I think he's a promoter at International Batteries. His question is basically that 100% of EV made by GM in 2017, 2021 were recalled. What can we learn from this? So is that something you have any information and you'd like to share anything?
See, today in the auto industry, recall is not a bad word. Recalls means basically you're more proactive, you're more customer sensitive. So there will be cases. But I think if you look at the EV industry, the way things is, and a large part has been the EV growth, has been in the auto, the three-wheeler EVs. Not much has gone wrong. So we need to have our antennas up. We need to continuously look at it. But there are learnings available, and I think a lot of learnings will happen from China. I don't know how we'll get that information. But China has gone through this entire phase of EV, right from the unorganized sector to the organized, the slow-moving, fast-moving. It's happening in Taiwan. It's happening in, I won't say in Japan, but it's happening in the Scandinavian countries. So continuously that, that keeping our mind and our windows open. So what's happening there and what are the learnings from there? I'm sure what the GM incident also, there will be some learning. It doesn't need to discredit that movement. There's nothing so dangerous in it because there are firewalls, there are approaches which are there. And it can be done. But obviously you have to have certain guidelines, certain principles, and certain indicators to show that if there is something is going wrong. And probably electronics, you get indicators much faster, much visible. Today, whether it's an infotainment system or Rashmi, where I'm talking of the safety systems, the signals which you get from vehicles today, which have a lot of electronics embedded in it, are much faster. And I'm talking of the danger signals, even opportunity signal and danger signal. That's the way I look at it.
Thanks a lot for clarifying this, Mr. Malhotra. An interesting question has come from Mr. Rafe Halim, and he's basically asking about the panelist take on dynamic grid. So one, I think he's also looking at, is there, if I can get this question right, that EVs also offer an opportunity from vehicle grid. That's one possibility which EV offer. And then also, so you can really use renewables when the sun is there, you can charge the vehicle. And I think some of the experiment that he mentioned was sun to car, a car to home kind of experiment, which have been tried but not been successful. So any insights on dynamic grids and especially vehicle to grid, is that a possibility or that's stretching the argument too far? So maybe I will ask Dr. Praveen to respond first and then to Rashmi ma'am.
Yeah, we have been working on V2G technology for almost close to 12 years now. The biggest challenge is that we have to pay attention to the power quality because any V2G interaction involves a lot of converters and inverters in between, which are going to inject harmonics into the grid and which damages the power quality. And we can also see during the daytime, if you just put an oscilloscope to your power supply, domestic power supply, you hardly see a sinusoidal voltage. It has all sorts of harmonics, which has a very bad impact on the transformers, on the protection circuitry of the grid, and so on. So we can achieve V2G, provided we know how can we reduce the total harmonic distortion, as we call it technically, of all the converters and inverters that are associated with it. If we can handle that problem, it's a very good technology to have. And we should also understand that all V2G interactions will happen at the distribution grid, not at the transmission grid. And distribution grid is highly dynamic. The loads keep changing very fast, and the stability of the grid becomes a critical issue, especially load, the voltage imbalances and so on. So it needs a proper coordination for this to be successful. But yes, it is doable. No doubt in that.
As Dr. Praveen mentioned, V2G is it's early days. I mean, you can't rush into it immediately. That's one area, but there's a lot of focus on that. And I think it's involving science. But the other thing which I think was mentioned was charging, because range and reach is one of the biggest problems on EVs. And the focus on using solar energy through solar panels on vehicles for charging, because if you can get away from the problem of reach and range, the range of the vehicle and also the reach of the network for charging, it can be a big asset. So that's an area which is a lot of work is going on. And I think with India's unlimited supply of solar energy and a lot of initiatives which has happened on solar energy and rates also in technology, that's very interesting. It can speed up the entire process of EV vehicles.
Yeah, just want to add a couple of points here. V2G experimentation is a very good way to move forward on fast penetration. But I think it will, at this moment, the way current grid situation is in India, It can work well at the local level on experimental basis. And then of course, it can do a large penetration. There are successful experiments. There are possibilities of using this in a local manner. Also using solar on something which can be integrated with the vehicles is the solar power as is coming from the metro lines or such, building up city-based models is what we are currently doing in Pune through my another association with Pune Knowledge Cluster. So we are looking at a grid stability at the city level than a complete country level. So that is something which can be tried out and then expanded.
Thanks a lot, Rashmi ma'am. Dr. Upendra Kulushrestha from Manipal University has asked a slightly interesting question, and he's asking, how can we train existing technicians on EV when the technicians themselves don't know anything about it? And this is also generally for scaling in transport sector, because even for drivers and conductors, a lot of this on-job training happens. So how do we shift this whole discourse from on-job training to more structured and formal training, especially with EV? Any reflection from the panelists?
So, one perspective I wanted to give. This was a big concern when mobile phones came, and when mobile penetration is now 70% or 80%. If you look at it, the number of people who are getting to authorized, you can say the Apple or the Xiaomi's, is hardly 5 to 10%. 90% of the mobile repair is happening at the unorganized sector or the front-end sector. So there is a natural, Indians have the natural innovation. I would call it jugaad, because Professor Kumar said, don't let the word jugaad, but innovation to learn new things. But I think the short curriculum courses, which are now YouTube, you can virtually learn any course or anything, and there can be a lot of interactivity. This can help the process, because you need a very specific, because a person who's there, he needs a very specific focused area. So there can be learnings, easier to learn to translate. I usually use technology very well, update those on the YouTube or update them on the social, and it can happen much faster. It's happened in the mobile phones. There's no reason why. I mean, maybe EV may be more difficult, but it can't happen there.
Okay.
Just to add to what Mr. Malhotra said, and I'll pick up from his word on mobile phones, that mobile learning, if you can get bit-sized learning, published through mobile application platforms with very specific communities in mind, let's say two-wheeler mechanic community or a four-wheeler mechanic community or a CV mechanic community separately, and build small modules, which could also be allowing user-created modules as well, and curate that kind of a content, because YouTube itself is a very vast kind of a thing, and a lot of people are not that good in time kind of searching for the kind of content they are looking at, and they give up. So if you could curate certain content, we are working with a very interesting experiment for two-wheeler mechanics. You have so many models and so many variants, and there are so many service issues related to each and every. And, you would understand that in two-wheelers, almost 80% of the vehicles get serviced in non-authorized dealers, effectively. So there is constant question of these community in terms of this model, what do I do with this sensor? Or this connector, and so on and so forth. So they are creating these very micro modules of learning, which is maybe between 2 minutes to 5 minutes to 7 minutes.
Absolutely.
And these have become very popular with a significant chunk of this community. We currently have in that app more than 15,000 active learners engaged at any point in time. And I think if we are able to focus on some of these vehicles, because of smartphone penetration, thanks to smartphone penetration, I think these are very viable mediums of instruction that are available.
Yeah, I would just like to add one point here, and that I draw from the experience that I had living and working in Germany for 10 years. So in Germany, they have a specialized training programs for any vocation. And that's what we should be having at a large scale in India. And even I went through many of those vocation programs. I learned plumbing. I learned laying electric cables in my home because getting somebody trained was too expensive. So with 4 or 5 weeks of plumbing program, I could fix most of the problems at home. So that way, if we have large scale training centers where you give training for 3 months, 6 months, this problem can be very much addressed to, and they would be all licensed people. So we don't even need to depend on unauthorized sector. They would be very much a part of the formal economy, and that would be good for the penetration of the technology and its success.
Dr. Praveen, I think Mr. Rajesh Kulkarni, who's the CEO of Mobility Aftermarket, asked a follow-up question, and he's saying that if videos or specific technical content regarding EVs or hybrids are made available, do the panelists feel there will be records for it? For example, workshops, institutes?
Yes, I think there is already a need. We do see a lot of our e-learning, m-learning modules that we are creating are very widely getting used. Challenge is that given the size of India, these numbers are still small. But if you were to look at these numbers in the context of other nations, these numbers in itself are fairly large. We are talking about maybe 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 number. Now, in Indian context, this is like a rounding off error in the entire population. But to achieve that also is, I think, a great effort that it takes. So I think we need to constantly keep doing that effort and making it work at the ground level.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lahiri. Yeah. And one more follow-up question from Sarafai Halim is that, so he has an EV, but existing mechanics are really scared to touch the vehicle, barring tires or so. So one, when will this scenario change? And then how do you go about transitioning to the scenario where the common mechanics are not afraid to touch an electric vehicle?
I think
in fact,
there is a learning curve.
I do agree that we are at the beginning of the learning curve, and of course, it takes time for people to get used to the technology. When EVs were to be introduced, there was a lot of discussion saying that we will be removing a lot of complicated powertrain, and it will become a very simple powertrain. Although the powertrain is simple, I think the overall controls are quite complicated. So I do agree that if there is any problem with the sensor, if there's any problem with the cable harness or whatever, the current mechanics or current service or dealer networks may not be equipped at this moment, but gradually we need to build this up, and very focused attention is therefore needed in this direction. Otherwise, we will lose out on the confidence that that is necessary for EVs to sustain.
I just want to add, one of the things which has been, when you talk to customers, they talk of the 5 R's as far as EV is concerned. One is the range, one is reach, one is reassurance or reliability, and other is the right price. So we have to focus on each of the R's specifically. In range, reach, and reassurance will come from the expanding the network, and also in terms of doing some work whereby the skills can be, leapfrogged. We can't go through the normal 3-4% rate of growth. It can leapfrog. And unfortunately, the penetration of EV was low. But I think you're seeing a lot of traction now, especially in the two-wheeler and small commercial vehicles. So I think it's time, but I think a special momentum or a certain push needs to be given by all agencies.
Okay. So one last question, probably, which is coming from Mr. Narayan Rao. And he's been saying that we have been talking mostly about skill development for automobiles, but what about the complete value chain? What about, let's say, the power generation, solar industry or wind power? So how do we bring that portion of skill development into the overall context of EV adoption?
Oh, that has to be absolutely done, because today, even today, more than 60% of the electricity comes from coal. So if we don't make the grid transition very fast, then we would be ending up running our vehicles on coal, which is far worse than running it on diesel or petrol. So that transition to the renewables has to be done very fast. And the way we are talking about e-mobility, we should also be talking about the skill development in renewable energy sector, which includes, again, all dimensions, all levels of skills. Absolutely. Without that, I think we would be going towards a disaster. I hate to see cars running on coal if we electrify it without the grid transition. That's for sure.
That's what, in fact, I meant by sustainability. And I'm happy to know that the power sector is also undergoing transformation. They are very well within, their own vision to identify their new skill requirements. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of synergy that is happening between transportation and the power energy sector. I am myself a part of hydrogen group. I am part of the solar energy group. So there is a synergy happening currently, and I can see that the subject is very, very seriously being addressed.
Thanks a lot.
On a lighter note, I'd just like to add, when I did my engineering in 81, and I took one special course on non-conventional energy. And the terms I still remember: geothermal energy, tidal energy, magnetodynamic energy, solar energy. But nothing moved for 30 years. We went for a sleep for like brief vehicle. But we have woken up now, so we need to probably start moving. Nothing much happened. The focus, if the thermal energy was 60% contribution, it remained somewhere around the same. But I think there's a lot of, as Rashmi said, there's a lot of focus now, and he's also sort of insight that we have to move forward. So I hope we shouldn't take another 30 years. I mean, I did mention it 40 years back, so it shouldn't happen that I'm using the same terms which are still rare.
Absolutely, and that's what we also hope and expect. So before we move towards the conclusion of this webinar, I think Mr. Sachin Jain from Mobitech has raised his hand for a long time. So Mr. Jain, anything specific you want to ask? Please go ahead. Please go ahead, Mr. Jain. I think
you have to take his question on the chat a little better.
Yeah, and you will have to enable him to speak.
Yeah, enable to speak, or you take it on chat.
We've given him rights to speak. Maybe he is not able to, I guess.
Okay.
Okay. So maybe since we can't hear him and can't see his chat. So one last question, maybe before we close, and I will just need a quick reflection from all the panelists. So one, I think there's a big concern which often keeps coming. What will happen to the existing workforce which is deployed in the conventional vehicle category, especially the internal combustion engine? How do we deal with so lakhs and lakhs of people who are employed in this? Is there a strategy? Is there a way to integrate into this transition? Or do you think they'll be left out, only the new set of people who would come and fill this gap? So any quick reflection on what to do with the existing workforce in the internal combustion engine space?
They should not be left out, and we should skill them very fast. That's the challenge that we should pick up.
So I agree with Dr. Praveen that we have to skill them, and it's not that difficult to skill them. I mean, the process has to start. Already the process started. A lot of electronics is being used. The process started, but you have to make it faster. And again, the concept of it is, I'm not saying it has to be a rebirth or a reincarnation. It has to be a relearning. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I think we have to take along that current workforce. Upskilling is what works well, but we have to also supplement. The same person, you can't expect him to all of a sudden have different skills altogether. So we have to supplement with the new skills, and that can happen in increments and in a planned manner, and giving assurance to the current workforce, for sure.
Yeah, completely agreed. I think it has to be a mix of upskilling of existing workforce, And as the workforce gets replenished with the new workforce needs to be trained in futuristic skills, if I may use that word generically, so that they come in with that kind of a thing. And also a substantial part of this workforce will also continue to work in the same space. So let's say there is a segment of, people who deal with tires and brakes, for example. So a lot of them will continue to do the tire replacement, the brake checks and stuff like that. I'm just giving a very random example. But many of them who are youngsters may need to be upskilled, because even those can become smarter. The tires are becoming smarter themselves because they are having sensors, etc. as we go forward. But if you look at the older set of workforce, maybe they can continue the way they are, and they will kind of come out of their workforce life cycle, and we may not necessarily need to reinvest a lot on their learning per se. It depends on what's the life cycle of those individuals are.
Okay, so with this, we have come to the end of this panel discussion on the roadmap to cope up with the emerging EV skill demand. And first of all, I really like to thank the Blue Circle for organizing this very, very interesting 90-minute session. And personally, I also learned a lot from the expert panels that we have had. So again, thanking all my fellow panelists, Mr. Lahiri, Ms. Rashmi, Dr. Praveen Kumar, Mr. Arun Malhotra. Thanks a lot for joining for such an interesting and insightful discussion. And I think the way we see it, and I see it personally, I think the future will be more cleaner vehicle, which will be, we will see much and more innovations happening in the transport space. And so we have to be geared up to meet these challenges. The harder part is one where you need that vehicle, you need the technology, you need the battery charging. But I think the softer part will make it work, because unless we have the skilled workforce, we may have smart vehicles, but if we don't have smart people to use it, that will be a big challenge. So we hope that we will concentrate more on this. And I think as Mr. Malhotra said, I think we have to do more this frequent interaction with various stakeholders. And I think this is one of such interactions, which is very interesting. And we hope to see many more. So once again, thank you, everyone. And I would invite Mr. Siddharth Anand to do the formal closing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am and sirs. Such an insightful and engaging conversation, and an absolute privilege to hear you all. And very well moderated, Mr. Bhatt. Our leaders and I have been hooked all the way till the end, and I've been taking home several nuggets from today's conversation. And I'm also receiving messages from our members as we speak. So thank you very much. And truly wish we had more time. And also thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining in such large numbers, and for always staying till the end, and for sharing excellent questions. Along with our weekly webinars and our publication, we are taking these discussions and conversations live on the exclusive community app, which is curated for senior leaders across our 6 focus sectors, which are e-mobility, energy, logistics, healthcare, real estate, and aerospace and defense. We're also adding new features and 14 new sector communities that also have synergistic diversifications, which are required to support the ecosystem to grow further. So whether you would like to engage with us on our platform, leaders are invited to join us. So thank you very much once again, ma'am and sirs. We look forward to more such discussions, and please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.